By the year 1858, the native population of New Zealand had become outnumbered by the colonial settlers from Europe, yet in 1840 there were about 2,000 permanent residents in New Zealand and an estimated 70,000 Māori. Needless to say, stress on landowners was high, and the Pākehā were constantly looking for new ways to obtain and industrialise new untouched regions. In the same year, the Māori King movement was founded. As the Māori became outnumbered, several chiefs felt as though they were losing control of their own affairs. In 1852, Māori chief Tamiana Te Raupraha travelled to England, where he was introduced to the concept of the monarchy through meeting Queen Victoria. He came back with this concept proposal to his contemporaries and began the search for a king. Te Raupraha's cousin, Watene Te Whiwhi, researched the tupuna of all possible candidates but was met with demurral. The problem, according to Te Kāinea Takirau, was summed up in the statement, "You are correct, I am chief, a descendant of your ancestors. However, the problem is that my pedigree adheres to only one people. My mountain, Hukirangi, does not move. I do not agree." Potato Te Wherewhere of Ngāti Mahuta was recommended, and Wiremu Taniha of Ngāti Hawa applied great pressure on him to accept. Wiremu, coming from unethical and racist behaviour, the Pākehā at the Native Affairs Office was able to use his anecdote to convince Te Wherewhere to go back to the Waitako and let them consider some tikanga for themselves. In 1857, at Rangiriri, Potato agreed to become king. He was crowned and anointed at Ngaruawahia in June 1858. All causes of the Māori King movement illustrate the desperation for the survival of their culture. Whilst Māori cultivated small areas, relying on extensive forests for berry, birds, and roots, settlers expanded their production capacity by burning forests and fern and planting grass seeds in the ashes. This caused great grief between the colliding cultures. The colonial government's native land purchase department adopted unscrupulous methods to take ownership, which included offers to chiefs or small groups of owners. Deals with individual Māori or groups that did not represent majority interests also dragged Māori into disputes with one another. As the white frontier encroached on their land, many natives became concerned that their land and race would soon be overrun. Upon being crowned, numerous North Island chiefs laid their land in service at Potato's feet. Many mountains, which became the boundaries of the Kingitanga territory, were named as guardians of the territory under Potato's dominion. Potato's subjects hoped to keep the lands and their communities together by removing the temptation to make ready money through selling, and placing ownership of such an entirety of land upon one head. The Crown was deprived of their ability to manipulate vulnerable Māori landowners. This was of great disapproval to the settlers, with the governor of the time, Gore Brown, stating that supporting the Māori King movement could only bring evil upon the heads of those concerned. Hitherto the Māori King movement, there had been no situation where several differing tribes are unified under one structure. There was one collective settler population and several different native tribes. The Māori King was instigated not only to halt land sales, but provide a means for this unification. This separation was a cause for conflict right from the emergence of the Māori population in New Zealand, most notably in the musket wars prior to the Treaty of Waitangi. In August 1854, Rari Waiawa and 4 other men were killed near New Plymouth for attempting to sell land. It was realised that there was a new pressing issue which affected all the Māori tribes collectively. In his speech of acceptance, Potato stressed the spirit of unity symbolised by the kingship, likening his position to the eye of the needle through which the black, white and red threads must pass. He called on his people to hold fast to love, to the law and to faith in God. Clearly, if the intertribal conflict were to continue, the Māori population would surely soon be wiped out. Sir Robert Stout, of the Church Missionary Society, also cited the need for an intertribal law which is managed by the natives. He said, "While the law interposes between the settler and the native, there is no law as between native and native. The ancient customs are falling into disrepute, and no new code is taking their place." Providing a law that only accounted for the Pākehā, as per the treaty, provided the Māori malefactors with a feeling of exemption from the law. To enforce this, an established monarchy would seem to be the most apt process. It was believed that the king would provide a safety net for these circumstances. The Treaty of Waitangi promised the native population protection from invasion by foreign countries, but did not account for internal discrepancies. Despite the benevolent promises of the settlers, their interests were in New Zealand's natural endowments, not in the Māori culture. They wanted to be taken seriously and thought a king would be an amicable way of establishing respect. Upon viewing the system implemented in Britain, Tamiana Te Raupraha became elated with his new idea. His view was that the Māori king could speak with one voice and achieve much more for the Māori as a whole. It took on the appearance of an alternative government with its own flag, newspaper, councillors, magistrates and law enforcement. The Māori king would be a more spiritual head in New Zealand, one to represent the moral beliefs of the Māori culture. He did not, however, realise that this would be seen as both provocative and anti the colonial establishment. Pōrito Te Wherewhere accepted kingship under this impression. The racist behaviour Wiremu Tamihara received at the Native Affairs Office was the exact inequality that the movement would seek to eradicate from New Zealand. He told the Taupiri missionary B.Y. Ashwell, "We are treated like dogs. I will not go again." He then went to Mangere and said to Pōrito, "Go back to the Waikato and let us consider some tikanga for ourselves." Thus, Pōrito was crowned as king and the movement came into fruition. Taranaki War was a result of the unscrupulous methods of the Native Land Purchase Department. This is because the Māori King movement gave the opponents to the sale of land in Waitara a power to stand up against the compelling Pākehā. The minor Te Atiawa chief, Te Tara Manuka, had offered to sell land in Waitara in the north to Taranaki to the Crown. The government promptly accepted the offer and Pākehā immediately planned to move in. He was one of the vulnerable individuals succumbing to the monopolistic tactics of the Crown. However, with the new monarchy, this purchase would not go so smoothly. The significant Kingitanga chief, Wiremu Kingi, denied that Taira had the right to sell the Waitara land. It was an individual deal that did not represent majority interests. This did not please the governor. After meeting with Te Atiawa personally, Brown convinced the chief that the government would not urge landowners to sell sentimentally or agriculturally valuable land to its people. He did, however, assert the Crown's disapproval of third-party interventions in land deals. Wiremu intended to hold the land, but did not sink conflict. Set to New Plymouth, along with the 65th Regiment under the command of Colonel Gold. Camp Waitara, this force's barracks, was established on the disputed land. Such aggressive advancement on the dispute discredits Gore Brown's presented benevolence to Te Atiawa, and shows that he had no genuine interest for the Māori sentiments. The natives were forced from their kāinga and Kingi was ordered to destroy any new pa he had built. Failure to comply would result in the blood of your people being upon his head. Kingi's response? Brashly built a fighting pa inside Peka block overlooking Camp Waitara, supported by warriors sent from the tribes under the king's dominion. If not for the influence of the King movement in this transaction, the land at Waitara would have been purchased and developed by the Crown without delay. The Waikato War was the Crown's definitive attempt to abolish the uprisal of the Kingitanga. The Governor George Grey cited the King movement as a major obstacle to the development of New Zealand. Despite the truce in Taranaki, the government was keen to punish the Kingites involved with the preceding war. Grey vowed to dig around the Kingitanga until it fell. Apparent in the aforementioned Taranaki War, unless forced below the sovereignty of the Crown, the movement would proceed to aggrieve the government. In order to amount of military force capable of eradicating the Waikato, Grey had to convince the Imperial Office that he had reasonable cause for attack. He used the drunken conversation between a Kingite and British official to provide reasonable grounds for military attack. In this conversation, it was said that the Māori King movement was formulating an assault on the government in Auckland, with an aim to push the settlers out of their country. However, this conversation took place between the hours of 11 p.m. and 3 a.m., and over several alcoholic beverages. Therefore, this claim was not only highly debatable, but a perfect example of the Crown's exploitative agenda. Notwithstanding Grey's controversial claim, he secured a military force. The campaign was fought by a peak of about 14,000 Imperial and colonial troops and about 4,000 Māori warriors drawn from more than half the major North Island groups. The Land Settlements Act of 1863 provided legislation for the seizing of land from Māori tribes, and most specifically the Kingites who had been in rebellion against the government after the 1st of January 1863. Its stated purpose was to achieve the permanent protection and security of the country's inhabitants and establish law, order and peace. Yet this forced the Kingitanga into the isolation of the King Country, a mountainous, poor and infertile region, clearly not providing the permanent protection and security for all inhabitants. Although the legislation was ostensibly aimed at Māori tribes engaged in armed conflict with the government, the confiscations showed little distinction between the loyal and rebel Māori tribes, and effectively robbed most Māori in the affected areas of their land and livelihood. Approximately 12,000 square kilometres, or 400,000 hectares of extremely productive Māori land was claimed. It must be noted that this figure was derived from the website of the Kingitanga and may be exaggerated. According to Dr. Ranganui Walker, this act provided the ultimate irony for the Māori who were fighting to defend their own land from the European encroachment. They were to pay for the settlement and development of their lands by its expropriation in a war for the extension of the Crown's sovereignty into their territory. Attracting little debate and only 2 votes against it in each of the lower and upper houses before it became law. This also highlighted the lack of respect for the natives from the government. In order to house the Kingitanga after the land confiscations prior to the Waikato War, the King Country was established. The Kingite forces retreated southwards from the Waikato after the Battle of Araucau in April 1864. The British forces followed, but eventually discontinued their assault. Heavy British losses at the Battle of the Gate Part at Tauranga in April 1864 prompted General Duncan Cameron to abandon further plans for military campaigns against the movement, and Grey and the colonial government were forced to accept this decision. Eventually, the movement fled to Maniatoto land, which became the King Country. This area of land, mountainous, poor, and isolated, was not an attractive conquest, exemplifying the extent of deprivation of Maori land by the settlers. Settlers who were told if they were to cross the boundary of the King Country or the Aukati, they did so under threat of death. The district lay principally in the Auckland province, but there were extensive portions in Wellington and Taranaki and, at one point, a contiguous boundary with the Hawke's Bay. Its northern boundary was the Puniu Stream, which marked the extent of the Waikato tribal territories confiscated after Māori Wars. In Taranaki, the confiscation line north of Waitara was another boundary. Both of these lines were proclaimed under the New Zealand Settlements Act 1863, but beyond these proclamations, the boundaries can only be guessed. Had the Kangitanga not been instigated, the Taranaki War, the Waikato War, the Land Settlements Act of 1863, and the King Country would never have existed. The instigation of the Maori King movement was a fundamental period of New Zealand history. The Kingitanga was the first major example of rangatira across the country uniting through a common cause to ensure the survival of their culture. It defied the way Maori were initially treated by the settlers and was a major example of Maori agency. However, due to the little prominence that the Kingitanga has in all government ordeals, the movement has little significance to those not directly involved today. Post-treaty, discrepancies between native and settler had been dealt through violence. For example, Honeheke storming Kororareka and removing the Union Jack flagstaff as a symbol of defiance. It was not until Maori began to adapt to the new colonised lifestyle that they weighed up new and adverse options. Te Rauparaha's visit to England can be seen as a table-turning event to introduce the natives to the idea of the monarchy. Over half of the major North Island tribes laid their mana under that of the king when it was first introduced, and the majority of those tribes supplied warriors to its affairs. It is estimated that during the first years of implementation, up to 10,000 Maori citizens devoted themselves to the Kingitanga. The Maori King movement indeed exists today. The current king, Tahutaya, is the seventh descendant of the monarchy and remains a part of the royal bloodline. Although it is an elective role not determined by heirship, there has been a hereditary line of Maori kings since its implementation, with the Te Wherewhiri lineage remaining unbroken since 1858.